Hello, colleagues, and thank you for attending the Financials 101. Ms. Jane Lee, and I'm the Director of the Financial Crime Resource Center, a program of the National Center for Victims of Crime. We're thrilled to partner with Wells Fargo Advisors to bring you this webinar. Our presenter will be Ron Long. Ron joined Wells Fargo Advisors through its predecessor, Wachovia, in 2002. His current role at the firm is Senior Vice President and Director of Regulatory Affairs and Elder Client Initiatives. In this role, Ron works with key business and support units to ensure that they are aware of challenges facing elder clients and preparing them for the changing regulatory and legislative environment. He assists the firm by frequently meeting with securities regulators and adult protective services, while also monitoring legislative changes impacting the retail brokerage industry. Ron worked for the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission in several roles, including as counselor to Chairman Arthur Levitt. He attended Williams College and received his law degree from Georgetown University Law Center. And with that, I pass the baton to you, Ron.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks everybody for participating in today's seminar. The title is Financial 101. I can tell you that we will need Financial 102, 3, 4, and 5 to fully go through all of the nuances of the financial services industry. So we're not going to turn most of the folks here on the phone into financial professionals in a one-hour seminar. What I would like to try and do, though, is go through some of the content there that will give you some familiarity with some of the financial issues and the way at least the firms on the retail brokerage side, and probably our banks too, work as it relates to dealing with elder financial abuse, reporting and handling cases. Jane, I do not seem to have control over the clicker, so if somebody could just move us to the next slide, which does talk about that overview, and that way I can hopefully keep you guys in touch with what I'm saying.
Hi, Ron. You should be able to move it with the arrows right above the PowerPoint slide.
The arrows right above the PowerPoint slide. I no longer have any arrows.
Oh, here, I'll take care of it.
Okay, thanks. There we go. That looks good. Thanks a lot. So, we're going to talk about best practices. There are some new legislative issues out there that are good. I do think there are some resources available for folks to use as they try and, again, I'm not having you try to get a securities license and become a stockbroker, but some of the online tools available will give you a little more familiarity with the financial industry and financial terms, financial products, such that as you face some of these elder abuse, financial abuse cases, you'll feel more comfortable and better able to walk through and navigate what's happening to a client or a victim. So we can go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about the Wells Fargo inventory. And our approach is similar to other firms, but we do find, if we can go to the next slide, we do find that it is interconnected. You want to have training of key personnel. At our firm, we train everybody, mandatory training every year, whether you're customer facing or not. And that is for the ability to recognize and report possible elder financial abuse. We have established a centralized unit. Again, many of the financial firms are doing something similar. It may not be an entire unit, but it could be someone that they've asked to do more in this area, maybe gain some specialized knowledge, attend maybe conferences like the NAPSA conference or the Gerontological Society of America conference, things like that where they gather more information. But using that unit, using that go-to person to help that firm better recognize and then report, whether to law enforcement or to adult protective services, potential elder financial abuse. All of the firms now are looking at ways to communicate more with the clients. Clearly, the best way to prevent abuse is to keep it from happening in the first place. So if client information allows an individual to recognize a scheme or recognize when someone's trying to exercise undue influence over them, that may help stop that in its tracks before it turns into a full-blown abuse case. In many instances, the client-focused information is particularly useful for the 30, 40, 50-year-olds for whom their parents or grandparents are potential victims, and this information will help them be in a position to better protect their loved ones who are older. More educational outreach, that's a little bit of what we're doing today, a little bit of what we do when we attend the different conferences in this field, whether as panelists or, more importantly, where we go as attendees to learn from those folks who have the greater knowledge on changes in the aging brain, maybe giving us some insight into why it is when we turn 78, we actually believe we won the Jamaican lottery that we never entered. So all of those educational sort of outreach efforts we think pay dividends. And finally, the partnerships where we work with a number of nonprofits in this area, whether it's an NCVC or some of the other groups out there doing good work as it relates to trying to prevent elder financial abuse. If we could go to the next slide. I did mention that a lot of firms are setting up centralized units. I wanted to go through the Wells Fargo Advisors Unit. We've now been in operation since June 30th of 2014, so the next few slides will help talk a little bit about how it's working at our firm. So we do have the manager of the Elder Client Initiatives. This woman is an attorney with training in elder issues, trust estates, that kind of knowledge, which we find very helpful. And she had done a number of the elder financial abuse reporting matters for Wells Fargo Advisors before we even created the unit while she was in the law department. But under her, she has a staff that manages to take in cases from all 50 states. So all of our advisors all send their concerns to this unit, and the unit uses that information to gather enough facts, maybe do some interviews of the financial advisor and his associate, maybe the manager, and then make a determination, go, no go, as to whether this matter should be reported to Adult Protective Services, in egregious cases to law enforcement, or maybe put it in a status of watchful waiting. There's nothing here yet, but let's keep an eye on it. They also act as counselors to a number of the financial advisors. When they see things that are happening, but they aren't sure yet whether it warrants a full investigation, this team will help decide with the financial advisor what they're actually seeing, maybe suggest some steps that they take next before it turns into a full-blown situation. I have the elder strategy leader listed up there, and that's a person who's been empowered by our CEO to actually be present at all operating divisions of the firm, whether it's operations, whether it's technology, whether it's marketing, whether it's new products, but it has the ability to talk to each of those division heads and ask them to make sure that they're putting an elder lens on everything they do. Focus on, if you're in marketing, are there things with colors and fonts that make it tougher to read and understand when your eyes start to age? Have them understand those issues and make their appropriate adjustments. We also have been, and we're on our second Washington University intern. This student is a master's in social work candidate, and they stay with us at the firm for 2 semesters, working with the elder client team, seeing some of the cases come in, seeing some of the trends, but more importantly, they are presenting to us brown bag lunch seminars where they take a topic that is in the social work world and try to walk us through some of the things about whether it's talking to the older client or customer, or understand the various stages of aging and the kinds of declines we can expect in 50s, 60s, and 70s. All of that kind of useful information. We won't become NSWs, we won't get our license, but we think as a firm we gain that much more knowledge when our team is aware of some of these issues in the social work educational space. If we could go to the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about exactly how it mechanically works at our firm. Other firms probably do something similar, but they do get the calls in from the field. They provide that guidance on dealing with elder issues. Many times the calls are along the lines, I'm not seeing anything live yet, but I'm very concerned about my 85-year-old client and her 45-year-old son who never seems to leave the couch. Whatever it might be, we take that information in and try to give them some guidance. They help with the reports to APS, and we're in a position with this team to respond to APS when they have follow-up inquiries or have questions. So we do work with APS directly when they ask and follow up with us on some of the cases we refer to them. We actually are using our team to provide more face-to-face training to our financial advisors. I mentioned we do have the training that's mandatory, but many times if you can do live scenario-based training, situational training, where it's not computer-based, but you can ask questions and run examples by the person leading the training, we think that's beneficial. And then I talked before about this, how we work elder into every part of the firm's fabric in terms of making sure that protecting our elder clients is uppermost in every operating division of the firm. We can go to the next slide. Just wanted to do this volume check for you because these are, since we've been in operation, we want to talk about the cases opened by month. We didn't have an official unit before we started in 2014, but we did try to keep count in the law department of the number of matters they were seeing that related to elders. And in August of 2010, we started that informal counting, averaged about 30 matters a month. You can see here that we're well above 30. We're almost 5 times as many cases on average as we were 5 years ago. Part of that we do know is that demographic change. Starting in 2010, 10,000 folks were turning 65 a day every day. So now we're at 2015. Guess what? Some of those 65-year-olds are now, it won't be 10,000 because we've lost a few in the 5 years, but still a huge number of those folks are now turning 70 every day for the next number of years. We have the new wave of 65-year-olds. All of that to say is just that volume is greater. There's more elders out there to be victimized. So I think that's part of what the numbers show. The other thing is that by doing more education, we're now having folks who may have seen something in the past, didn't kind of like what they were seeing, but didn't really know where to go or whether you would call it abuse, or didn't even have a name for it in their mind. Now with the education we're doing, the training we're doing, folks are now more aware and they can pick up the phone and call our centralized unit with their concerns. And I do think these numbers, well over 150 matters a month, pretty much since March of this year. I do think those numbers reflect better education and just a demographic tsunami of older clients coming through our firm. And I guarantee you the other firms in the financial services industry are seeing something similar as well. We're already one slide ahead, or was I one slide behind? I see we have the top 10 states, so let's just do that. This could be a little bit, and this is just Wells Fargo again, not for the country or all the financial firms. So a little bit of this is our footprint. We're big in California, we're big in Florida. A little bit of it could be in New York and New Jersey. Maybe folks are more aggressive at jumping their older parents and grandparents for the money. We don't know. But anyway, that gives you a snapshot of just our firm in terms of how the cases have tracked over time. If we could go to the next slide. Folks have all heard this anecdotally. We now have documentary evidence to show that the bulk of the abuse that we see, most of it is occurring with our family members. So you can see it by almost 40% difference. Family members are primarily the perpetrators of elder financial abuse. We do have the third parties out there that could be the neighbor, could be new friends or what have you. Those are prominent. We have others, which is the catch-all phrase we threw in there. And then diminished capacity, that's number 4. I do believe that soon this will rise to number 2 and possibly number 1, because again, with that huge influx of older clients, those 65-year-olds, we also know that, and it's just a percentage thing, that at a certain age, at around 65, close to 8% of the population may have dementia or diminished capacity. At 70, it's closer to 16%. So if you have 10,000 turning 65 a day, just on numbers, some 8% of that group may be suffering from diminished capacity or dementia. So we do think that number will grow over time as we get this older population down the road. And then our scams, those are our friendly Nigerian princes, the grandma scam, the lottery scams, all of those are part of our top 5 of cases at our firm. I venture to say again, other firms in the financial services industry should be in a similar position. I did want to spend some time on the next slide, which is about age group. This was surprising to me. It may not be surprising to many in this field and on the call, but the bulk of our cases are coming from our 80-year-olds. You see it, it's almost double of the next number, which is the 70-year-olds. And I just worry that it's a function of, in some of these instances, that somebody's saying, Mom's still here, I don't have the money yet, so maybe I need to start. So 80 is that number where they thought Mom would be gone by now, and yet she's still hanging around. You see, we go 70s. Look at the number for the 90-year-olds, number 3. So we're seeing the prevalence, if you believe my theory, which is not a great one, but that as these folks continue to live and live longer, that builds a frustration in people who maybe have been counting on some of this money to roll to them when nature takes its course. They get frustrated, they're not happy, and they then start to wonder if they can do something now instead of waiting for life's normal processes to act. We have, in our firm, and I think many of the firms are doing this, you see the 50s, the 40s, the 30s. So we do set it up that our unit looks at elder financial abuse for folks 60 and older, and then we also include in that number the abuse of vulnerable adults, those over 18 and under age 60. Many of these are, we often hear people talk about special needs kids. Well, many of these special needs kids turn into special needs adults. And then you have the family, and many of them do try to plan for this, so they'll set money aside, and it needs to be managed, so they'll have, if Billy has special needs, they'll know his sister Susie was always nice to them, to Billy, so she is asked to be in charge of Billy once the parents go. We're just seeing way too many situations, and you can see the numbers there. They're not huge, but when you see abuse in the 40s and the 30s and the 20s, it is that scenario where that sibling, maybe in that first month, maybe in that first year, they more or less adhere to the parents' wishes, but they're under pressure. Maybe they have a kid all of a sudden going to college, or they have some other expenses that they themselves hadn't planned very well for. And in many cases, Billy's in the group home. He's being well taken care of. He's not going to miss this money. And away you go. You start down an abusive path of misusing the money set aside for the special needs adult. So we could go to the next slide. I wanted to go inside a little bit more of what we do at Wells Fargo Advisors when a case comes in. So we'll take that initial call. We'll have a discussion with the person making the call. We want to understand what it is they're concerned about, what the name of the client, the account number, and that intake is just that basic information. And then the team does a follow-up, and this will be handled by one of our case managers. The case manager will look at 6 to 12, maybe 18 months of account statements, looking at the account, seeing what the previous patterns were, and then seeing if the trend lines changed recently in keeping with what the report of potential elder financial abuse stated. And then they will work through the matter and determine if there are other people at Wells Fargo that are needed to talk to. Is there someone else on the account that could be a sibling or another relative that we can talk to about the concerns we see? Maybe it's one of those situations where the client is starting to decline and believes that the Nigerian prince is her friend and she needs to send him the $50,000. Maybe if we can call a trusted son or daughter, then we can have them talk about whether they can talk their parent off the ledge and not have that money go out of the country. We make that decision on whether to report with the authorities. So we know in many states, Adult Protective Services is the agency. As I noted before, sometimes in egregious cases, we think law enforcement needs to be involved. And what we've started to do more of at Wells Fargo Advisors in the last 12 to 18 months is we think our securities regulators have a role to play. And many times we may make a referral to that state securities regulator, recognizing that for them, their jurisdiction covers anything that's fraudulent in connection with the purchase or sale of a security. Most instances, in order for a bad guy to get money from our client, it does require activity that we believe is in connection with the purchase or sale of securities such that our state securities regulator would have jurisdiction over these matters. In some states, that's a difficult sell. In other states, they clearly embrace that obligation and will take these cases on and try to pursue them from a securities regulatory angle. Then the tougher decision, though, is should we be placing a hold on the account? We have a suspicion of abuse. Maybe it's a daughter, maybe it's a son or some other person seeming to drain money from the account. Maybe they, in fact, do have a power of attorney, but we think that a power of attorney is being abused. We have to make a decision as to whether we continue to allow money to leave the account or do we put a freeze or hold on the account. That is a decision that's not easy to make. In many instances, it runs counter to some of our obligations under the securities laws. All brokerage firms do have a general obligation to faithfully and promptly execute the orders of their clients. In this case, we would be saying, no, we're not going to do what you've asked because we suspect elder financial abuse. Most instances, there is no statutory protection for doing that. We'll talk a little bit more about what's happened in at least 3 states and what's underfoot in a number of places to maybe help financial services firms, particularly brokerage firms, deal with those kinds of issues. So you see that next bullet, we do, if appropriate, we will file a report with the appropriate authorities, primarily Adult Protective Services or whatever the agency is called in that state, but we also will document our actions as a team so that we have that record and that information here in the firm should anyone challenge anything that we've decided or done. So that overall is the mechanism of how this works at Wells Fargo Advisors. And what we should talk about on the next few pages is some of the things that, if you're on the Adult Protective Services side, what we think may be some best practices in working with financial institutions as it relates to what their obligations are financially and what it is you need to do to work through a case. So the first thing is to have a good understanding of what kind of financial institution you're working with. Are you dealing with a bank who has basic deposit and savings concerns where withdrawals can be made in any fashion at any time? And those sort of issues are similar to maybe a credit union, but then you're working with a brokerage firm. Many times the types of instruments that are available at the brokerage firm, it could be a mutual fund account. It could be an exchange traded fund or ETF. It could be other securities being the broad term that cover a number of instruments that are out there in the industry. It could be bonds, which are essentially loans by a client to a firm, and that firm promises to pay them interest while they're using the client's money, and at some point later will give the client all of that money or the principal back. All of that needs to be understood as to whom you're dealing with because it can impact what kind of remedies or results that financial institution could provide given the typical situation that they're addressing. And then when a referral is made to you, there's a decision by the Adult Protective Services agencies or whoever's doing the investigation as to a need for documents. We think here it's important that you be very clear and direct with us on the documents you need and trying to be inclusive. So you're going to gather information. Remember, we're just a financial firm. We have no power to question potential third-party abusers or what have you, but you do have that authority, so you're going to have more information, more background about what that situation is that you're facing. So you will then be in a position to ask for documents that will help support your inquiry, your research. So we need you to be pretty clear and precise about the documents you need. Try to be as inclusive as you can. If you can get the full picture, and many times, particularly let's take a Wells Fargo client, for example, they invariably have more than one account. And it's important that you know that maybe the abuse is occurring in 2 or 3 of the accounts and not just one. So make sure you're asking for enough information that puts you in position to know where the accounts are coming from. Then what types of documents are you looking for? Is it just the statements because you want to see what the inflow and outflow is? Are there copies of checks that you want? You want to see how the transfers have gone. Sometimes there are wires out of the account to other bank accounts, and you'd like to see all of that information. So you need to be precise about that. Now, I have this, when do you need the information back? I know the answer is always yesterday, but it would help us from a time frame standpoint. Are we talking 2 weeks? Are we talking 4 weeks? Are we talking literally you're going into court looking for a TRO or some other type of emergency action where you need evidence and documentation within a day or 2? Can't promise we can ever meet some of those tight deadlines, but it does help us if we know from where you sit how the case is progressing and what kind of time frames are you under. And this is true for us, but it should be true for any firm. After you've made that request, you haven't received the documents, definitely follow up by call, email, if you need to walk in and knock on the door. But make sure you're following up and making sure we, on the financial institution side, are in fact producing or trying to produce the records you're looking for. If we could go to the next slide. Wanted to walk through just one example of a document request that we think is really helpful in trying to get the information out there. So we blacked out a number of things, but where you have account numbers, that is very, very critical for us, particularly when it's an accurate account number. But account numbers help us move through our system much faster than just the name. Names work, and we can work with the names, but names plus account numbers just make it that much faster. And then the name of the client, and that you want more than just a single account, all of the accounts, any and all accounts in the name of, for the benefit of. Those are all the legal terms that folks throw around, but they are important because you don't want to have an account left out where somebody tries to say, well, you simply ask for accounts in the name of Ronald Long, as opposed to also those accounts where he's a beneficiary or trustee or what have you. And then you walk through identifying who you are, why you want the records, and why you think you're entitled to the records. And then you, if they're itemized things, you can see here, signature cards often are very important. The account applications. Many times you see the situation can be a concern about someone trying to open a new account and the signature of the person doesn't match the signature held by the firm on other parts of that account. So all of that is important information. Note that phrase in there, whether open or closed. For some of our firms, you need to specify that out, that you want accounts, even those that are closed, sometimes can provide valuable information. And for your given case, that may be what you want as well. If we can go to the next slide. I do think this statutory information is helpful. Many times the request will come into one part of the firm. It may have to go to the legal department for a review or what have you. what you've done here has been very precise for the legal department about why you're entitled to these records at this time. And then always give a contact person or someone that we can get back to with questions or comments. If we can go to the next slide, NAPSA has been trying to work with a sort of uniform document request. This is done by Joe Snyder, who works with the Philadelphia Adult Protective Services Agency. And he and his team have come up with something that I think is even more streamlined. So in many instances for practitioners on the APS side, there's no need to try and reinvent the wheel. This is a very clean document. We're trying to work with a number of the financial services firms to say that if folks do submit documents in this format, we'll get agreement that all of us are willing to take and act pretty quickly on documents sent with the uniformity of this type of request. And here you see, rather than having you have to spell out everything, you can itemize exactly what it is you need in your given case. Many times you'll check all of them, and that's fine, but sometimes given the facts and circumstances of the actual matter you're in the middle of, rather than clutter up the request, have it take longer because you've asked for the kitchen sink, you can be very precise, laser-like, going to exactly what's needed in your situation. You give us a date on when it's needed, you give your signature title and email address, contact information, and the way we should go. And then that one, if you go to the next slide, and this is where I said I'd probably get in trouble more than not for saying this, but I think our financial firms are pretty, in my mind, tied into and obligated to Gramm-Leach-Bliley definitions here that records, no privacy exemption, no privacy concerns should impact a request that relates to potential fraud or unauthorized transactions and claims. Elder financial abuse fits squarely under this. I think putting that in this proposed uniform sort of document request is something, and it's going to take more work. You'll probably, in your state and some of the other states, need to work with your local banking agencies and banking groups and securities industry groups. But all of us should be on the same page that if we're in agreement that it's important to stop this, and we're in agreement that there can be a streamlined way to get essential records, let's all sign up for something that works, and maybe we don't have to wait for Washington or our state capitals to do that, but have that be done by mutual agreement. So that's all to say that for many folks, I would hope that somewhere down the line you're working in your areas to see if you can use something similar to the uniform document request that's been created by the folks up in Philadelphia. If we can go to the next slide, I want to, again, get back into talking about some practices. These are challenges, and I will go out on a limb again to say that I think much as some of the financial institutions have been hiding behind GLB, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, the Privacy Acts under banks and brokerage accounts, I think some of our adult protective services agencies have been hiding behind our investigations are confidential, so we can't tell you anything. I don't think that's what that confidentiality goes to. As it relates to trying to resolve the challenges or the concerns of potential elder financial abuse, that you could not return to the actual firm that made the report of the potential abuse, that provided you the records, and at least tell them, yes, continue to hold the freeze on that account. Our investigation's ongoing. We're closing in on the perpetrator. Whatever it might be, I don't think that violates confidentiality, but I'm just one person. So anyway, but where you can, where you think it's within your rules and regulations to follow up with the financial institutions, we think it's very important that you do that to let us know where it stands. Because, as I said, in many of these instances, we're putting freezes on accounts where there may not be any pure statutory authorization to do so, knowing from you that the investigation is ongoing, it's alive, that there's still a reason to preserve this client's money from potential abusers, gives us a leg to stand on as we continue the freeze or the hold on the account. We think the part about providing information regarding people you're investigating, that does help, but that's, again, state by state. I do think we want you to be partners, as I talked about with the subpoena, but getting engaged locally in the areas of financial abuse, what the firms can do, what the institutions can do, and what Adult Protective Services can do, how all can work together to improve the reporting and the reporting back on what the results are or whether there's abuse has been found or not. And then working with all people, whether those who are in this kind of phone call or others, we think is very critical as well. Wanted to go into some legislative changes that I think can make some of this easier for all of us. Let's start with Missouri. Many of you have probably heard of the Missouri senior savings legislation that was signed by the governor and went into effect in August of this year, 2015. And that legislation is critical on three fronts. The first is it allows a brokerage firm who suspects diminished capacity or dementia or elder financial abuse. It allows us to contact a trusted person and let them know. We wouldn't talk about the details of the account, but to call them up and say, Susie, you're in Seattle. We have concerns about your mom. We need you to fly back here to Washington, D.C. to check in on her. We can do that whether we have permission in writing from the client or not. So in Missouri, if that client is a Missouri resident and we suspect potential elder financial abuse, we can essentially breach privacy to notify a trusted family member. Now, in order to do that, to have the protections for doing that, we have to notify both Adult Protective Services and the securities regulator that that's what we intend to do. But once we do that, we can contact that person in circumstances where otherwise would be called a breach of privacy. In addition, we're able to hold the transactions for up to 10 business days while there's an investigation by the state of this claim of potential elder financial abuse. We think that's critically important, and they can get in, they can get engaged. They will know that while they're investigating, the money's not still heading out the door because the firm has put the hold on it. And then the final part of this three-part rule that we think is very important is that when we do those two things, whether it's to notify a potential family member that we've got concerns or whether it's to put a hold on the account, we will be immune from civil liability in Missouri for doing that as long as we've done it in good faith. We think this legislation should be a model for the country. Right now, we do have the ability to do a hold in Washington State and in Delaware. We can do the 10-day hold as brokerage firms, or in Washington, Delaware, it's banks or brokerage firms. Brokerage firms only in Missouri. They'll soon be looking at adding more to that and giving them that ability to help fight financial abuse with these tools of being able to call in the family member and being able to put a hold on the account. Now, if we go to the next page, we have our North American Securities Administrators Association, known as NASA, but not the rocket scientists. But they proposed a model rule that can help in this area as well. I do have concerns with their rule, and I won't go through all of them, but one of them is I can tell you that they start with the concept that their model rule would permit you to contact anyone the client has listed in writing at account opening. My concern there is, in many of these instances, if the client had had that kind of foresight to give us a name in advance, we wouldn't need the Missouri rule that I just mentioned, or any rule. You've given us the name, we have their name. I don't need a rule to tell me I can contact someone whom you've already given me the name of. and given me permission to do that. But that's where the state rule starts, so I have that concern there. They have, they want brokers and investment advisors to have a mandatory reporting obligation for elder financial abuse. There are a number of financial firms that have concerns about that mandatory reporting. I will tell you there are a number of APS leaders who have concerns about mandatory reporting. The concern I think they feel is that the quality of reports is less when you mandate it, such that people throw at you any and everything, forcing now APS, they'll have to use more staff to screen through everything that comes in the door to determine which ones are real reports and which ones aren't. Now, the firms in the NASA proposal do get the 10-day exemption on executing transactions for up to 10 business days, and then they would get a safe harbor as well if they acted in good faith, not faint. Don't ask me how that got in there. But if they act in good faith, we would be protected in a safe harbor as well. I wanted to go to FINRA. So FINRA is a self-regulatory organization, or a private regulator, if you will. So we have the Securities and Exchange Commission, government regulator. We have the state securities regulators, government regulators. And then we have FINRA, which is a private regulator set up by the members, but authorized by Congress and the SEC to, in fact, assist the SEC in regulating the securities industry. FINRA has put out a proposal on trying to deal with elder financial exploitation. And their first part of their proposal is that they would require every brokerage firm to at least ask every client at account opening to give the name of a trusted individual. The client doesn't have to give us a name, but the brokerage firm must ask. If you go back to what I was saying earlier, it always is helpful if the client had the foresight to tell us that in an emergency of my 3 kids, never ever call my son Brian, he's an idiot, but call my daughter Sarah or my other daughter Megan, because those are the 2 responsible people in the family. If we get that information in advance, that makes it much easier as the client ages and situations arise. The FINRA then says, but if the client hasn't named anyone, we could contact an immediate family member if no trusted person is named. And then we're allowed to put a hold on disbursements out of the account as we, when we suspect elder financial abuse. And we can put that hold and not be subject to any sanctions from FINRA for doing so. So we think that's a good proposal as well. But let's not stop there. We now have on Capitol Hill our federal legislators getting involved, and they've now said that they see this area as important as well. So they're using the Senior Safe Act of 2015 as a proposal. This is done by Senator Collins and Senator McCaskill. And they're using the language from Maine, which has, I don't know if they've trademarked it yet, but this sort of Senior Safe Act concept. So this legislation would remove, and we've heard it from all kinds of different folks, that we don't know if we can report to APS, we don't know if it breaches privacy. At the federal level, they're saying there is immunity to banks, credit unions, broker-dealers, and investment advisors who in good faith report potential exploitation of elderly clients. So we think, and that's just a proposal, it's on Capitol Hill, has to go through all of the things that normal legislation has to go through there, and then it would end up coming back to the president for signature. Not sure where it goes in an election year as we're going to have in 2016, but I think this is a sign and indication that, again, this whole concept of elder financial abuse, and many of you in the field will know that 3 to 4 years ago you almost could get no traction on it. Here within the space of 6 months, you've got states, you've got the private regulators, you've got the federal government, the federal legislators, all looking at this and saying, we think something needs to be done. Let us tell you what our effort is to make changes in this area. I wanted to go to this slide, resources, hands-on banking. As I said at the outset, to truly do a full financial services 101, we need several courses, 101, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can short circuit that, and this is available to anybody out there. This handsonbanking.org. While created by Wells Fargo, it's almost open source, open label. Go in, we've got a module on seniors, but you've got numerous modules in there that will help you walk through and understand more about financial instruments, financial services, both banking and brokerage generally. I will not try to turn our social work professionals and others working for the elderly or with the elderly into stockbrokers. That's not the point. But using something like hands-on banking is a means that at your own pace, you can gather just that much more information, just that much more knowledge about the workings of the financial world, so that when these cases start to come through, and you are in a tough position because you see all of the cases. Financial abuse isn't your only mandate. I understand that. But when you do have one,
Ron, we lost your audio. Okay, we will wait for Ron to log back in. In the meantime, I will take over for a second and talk about the other resources for seniors. There's NCEA. There's also the LBGTAgingCenter.org, area agencies on aging, NAPSA, which is at napsanow.org, and our organization, victimsofcrime.org. I think we're going to get Ron back in a second.
So it looks like I had a technical difficulty there with the audio. I hope I was able to catch up with everyone.
Yeah, Ron, I just listened to...
I hope you... Oh, just lost you again.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. So yeah, I was hoping you heard my spiel on hands-on banking. And then the other resources here, I do want you to look at, and a lot of folks are working in this field. I point out the areas on aging. I think the LGBT, elder financial abuse, is a growing area that is very nuanced and different than our normal financial abuse, and we need to be more aware of some of the challenges that community faces as well. And we have NCVC, so the resources are out there. I hope I've left us enough time for questions. So Jane, I'll throw that out to you to see if you have questions, either live or
sure.
through messaging.
Great. One question is, Wells Fargo have a set protocol for reporting suspected financial abuse to law enforcement?
Not a set protocol. I think it's, we know it when we see it, but you do make a good point. I think it's the ones where we think there's imminent harm, potential physical harm, or full theft of all money immediately at issue that might lead us to go right to the police. But yes, there is not a written protocol that if these three things, then call the police.
Great. And for victim advocates, what documentation should they request from the victim in order to request documentation needed?
Well, that's a good point. It doesn't always work, but if you could get them to sign, and every firm has some version of a permission document, but if you could put something together from the victim saying that I authorize, and it can be whomever, to gather all information related to my account and provide it to Adult Protective Services, that, or in whatever the victim's advocate group is, I think that's very helpful to get that information in writing and in the hands of the financial firm.
Great. And the Missouri Senior Savings Plan, does that only allow contact with family? What about APS?
Remember, APS is part of our mandatory reporting to even get the protections in Missouri. So in Missouri, the way the rule works is when we suspect dementia, diminished capacity, or elder financial abuse, and we want to contact others, we must first or soon thereafter contact the Adult Protective Services agency in Missouri and the state securities regulator. So that's built in from where we sit.
Okay. What does FINRA stand for? Did you suggest this to be identified in the request for records? Please explain again.
Sure.
Yeah, is there a federal law that requires banks to consider the risk of accounts abuse occurs? I'm not sure about that last question.
I'll take a stab at the last one in a second, but let's do FINRA first. Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. FINRA is the private regulator of the financial securities industry, technically member-owned and member-operated, but it operates with the mandate from the SEC and Congress, essentially, to keep an eye on our industry. You technically should rarely be needing records from FINRA. There is a part of the FINRA process called broker check, which if the abuse is done by a financial professional, you might want to see what their broker check record looks like. And you can request that from FINRA on their website. So that should be, I think it's finra.org. Then the second question was?
Let's see, did you suggest this be identified in request for records? And I think you kind of answered that.
No.
Yeah. And is there a federal law that requires banks to consider the risk of account abuse occurs?
No, I think what they're trying to get to, we do have an obligation to report suspicious activity. And in 2011, that's called a SARS report, Suspicious Activity Report. All financial institutions must file those. Usually they were looking for terrorists or money laundering, what have you. But in 2011, they made it explicit that elder financial abuse was a box we should be checking on the SARS reports if, in fact, elder financial abuse is involved. So we should be doing that to the federal government in our suspicious activity reports.
Another question is, what is your suggestion if the victim refuses to give permission for APS to obtain financial records?
Yeah, that's a tough one, but I think the permission is not absolutely required for APS to investigate. Depends on your state, but in that, I do think that will go back to what I said under the Graham-Leach-Bliley privacy information, that privacy rule does not apply when it's in connection with investigating fraud or preventing the abuse of an account. Now, you're going to get pushback from a number of financial institutions on my interpretation, but that's what I think GLB in that section stands for.
Is this information just for Missouri? I'm assuming not. I'm assuming it's for all of Wells Fargo advisors.
Yeah, the information is for all of Wells Fargo advisors. The question, remember the Missouri statute only applies for Missouri residents, the legislation I talked about. But what I've described here is what we do on the Wells Fargo advisors brokerage part of our operation. And as I said, this is not exactly what all the other financial services firms are doing, but many of them are doing something similar, whether it tracks exactly what we do at Wells Fargo or not. Many are trying to tackle this issue of elder abuse in a way that works for their firm.
And I have two questions about California. Is there a statute in California like Arizona that allows APS to gain bank account information? And where could somebody get information about California?
Yeah, I don't know if California has a statute similar to Arizona. And yeah, I don't know the easiest way to get information from California on APS. I would think I forget the name of the agency in Sacramento, but they're essentially adult Protective Services head in Sacramento would be able to answer those kinds of questions.
Can banks send financial documents to APS by fax or email with password protection, or should this be U.S. mail?
That's a good question. I think we can send documents through secure email. You've got to be secure on your end. We've got to be secure on our end. I believe we have done that. And I think many of the firms try to find ways to do that. Clearly, U.S. mails is what many of us use, but I don't think that's the exclusive way that we share documents.
Do banks have a responsibility to protect and potentially freeze an account under federal law? If so, what is that law?
Yeah, I'm not the strongest on banking law. I don't know is my easiest answer, and I'm sorry I can't say that whether we do or not under banking law.
Okay, let's see. I think I have asked a lot of the questions presented by our attendees. I just also want to add that, Wells Fargo Advisors is one of, obviously, many financial institutions. Other financial institutions, such as Green Dot, they have their own best practices. I have a fraud investigator from Green Dot that shared some tips for me to share with you. It might be helpful in considering when you work with other financial institutions. Also, specifically regarding subpoenas, be careful in requesting the authorization versus the posted transaction. Authorization date and time of card use will indicate the time and card that the date the card was swiped. Posted transactions will show all transactions, but it depends on how long the merchant takes to post the transaction, so be careful of that distinction. Also, you may want to consider a second subpoena once you have phone numbers and IP address that result from the first subpoena. When dealing with identity theft, you may want to request all incoming recorded calls on the account. So there are some other tips and practices. If you want some more information about Green Dot, I happen to know it, so you can email me at jlee@ncvc.org. But certainly what Ron shared, I think could be universally applied in dealing with any type of financial institution. So I think those are the questions. Thank you, Ron, very much for your time and this Financials 101. I think it's been very valuable. And thank you for all the participants.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks, everyone.